Attacking play against the Dutch, side 1. This is a 90-minute tape by Otto, which introduces the white player to a little-known opening gambit line against the Dutch defence. This offers prospects of sharp tactical exchanges right from the start of the game, without allowing black to settle down to any prepared standard system such as the stone wall or the classical or the Leningrad variation that he may wish to play. Of course, these systems have been extensively analyzed and are well known in modern chess theory, and although white too could employ such countermeasures as Staunton Gambit, this too, with the vast knowledge of modern opening strategy, is unlikely to confront his opponent with any unpleasant surprise. In connection with his tape D4C4, Raymond Keane mentioned a number of suggestions against the Dutch, but these, I suspect, may just fall short of the necessary knowledge that the white player must have against top-class opposition from an experienced player with a Dutch defence. So, if you belong to that category of player who feels disappointed with your recent results for white against prepared variations of the Dutch defence, and are looking for something that can not be found in any standard textbooks, then this tape is just tailor-made for you. You may even have given up playing d4 altogether because of your fear of the Dutch defence. I have known this to happen. If you employ my system, you will gain the benefit of the surprise element, at least for a long while to come. And you will find that there are some interesting resources for white, regardless whether black accepts or declines the gambit. Above all, and this is most important, black will be frustrated in his attempts to wrest the initiative from his opponent at the very early stage in the game, which no doubt is his intention when he chooses to play the Dutch in the first place. So with these few introductory remarks in mind, let's now have a look at what I will call the twin exit points of our theme. 1 d4 f5 and 2 g4 for white, which gives us diagram 1a. And we'll call this the bayonet attack. And secondly, 1 d4 e6, 2 c4 f5, and 3 g4 as in diagram 1b. And this is not entirely unknown. As we shall see when we discuss it, it was already played quite extensively in the late 1950s and 1960s by a Bulgarian master, Pantaleyev, who scored some good successes with it. So we'll call that the Pantaleyev variation as from diagram 1b. Before we go any further, we should perhaps add that the last few years have brought about a revival of the move g4 in quite a number of other variations too, both with the white and the black pieces. And much of this is due to the research of Michael Basnan, who elsewhere has explained in great detail the underlying strategic and tactical motives of this idea. Against the Dutch, white primarily aims at creating open lines, ideally along the H-file or if this isn't possible, along the G file. With the move F5, black has already created some slight weaknesses or targets for the opposition around his own king, and it's precisely this which white wants to exploit and perhaps extend to his advantage before black has had time to consolidate. We shall examine the tactical possibilities of diagram 1A on this side of the tape first, and treat the chances that arise from diagram 1B separately, since these systems, though related, do not present the identical problems. At a glance, white's idea then is already clear as soon as he's played the move G4. If black captures the pawn, then white immediately follows this up with the move H3. The capture of the second pawn is now very risky indeed. Black will certainly never dare to castle on the king's side, but even if his king is left in the center, it will be equally vulnerable there, and we shall see that any other replies by black too are not without problems for the defense. If, on the other hand, black ignores the gambit pawn on G4, then he must always reckon with white's further advance of the pawn to G5, with the effect of either dislodging the black knight from F6 at a very early stage when black would have preferred to keep it there, or prevent the black king's knight from reaching F6 altogether. As we play our gambit, there's also another very interesting comparison that comes to mind. For in many ways there's a close correlation here between this and, with colors reversed, the from gambit against the bird's opening. The attacking side tries to create an inroad via the square complex of F7, G6 and H7 and exploit the weaknesses there, as we've said just now. As indeed in the from gambit, black's aim is to do something very similar when he exploits the weaknesses round the corresponding squares G3, F2 and H2. So let's go ahead and have a look at a few practical ideas. From diagram 1A, play the move for black F takes G4, and now 3H3 for white, and we'll first try and see what happens if we go the whole hog. So black plays G takes H3, and we see a kind of Benko gambit, only with colors reversed and on the opposite side of the board. White now captures with a knight for knight takes H3, and black replies for knight to F6. Without this move, of course, black really hasn't got a defense, and he should really not delay this any further. But now white plays queen to D3. This is the position of diagram 2. Please switch off. If this seems to you for the moment just caveman's tactics, they are nevertheless justified. In fact, there is no way black can stop the threat of knight to G5. For instance, let's assume he tries 5G6, white knight to G5, and black plays bishop to G7. This, of course, is one of the early anti-from gambit recommendations with colors reversed, but here, of course, it's much too slow. White now surprises his opponent with the move rook takes h7. This is even better here than knight takes h7, as we shall see. And white is now threatening mate in 2, and black cannot really stop it. You can work this one out for yourselves. I hope it has whetted your appetite, and as opening traps go, it's really quite original. From diagram 2, this time let's play a different move for black. Let's try 5 d5. Again, white plays knight to g5, and now the move 6 g6. But once again, white can reply rook takes h7, and this is very annoying. Supposing black plays rook takes h7, white 8, queen takes g6, check. Black has to play his king to d7. This is an awful square for the king. White now plays knight takes h7, and now black is a pawn down and his position is wrecked. He cannot, of course, recapture on h7, because then bishop to h3 with check leads to mate. But even if he chooses a move like knight to c6, white has a similar threat, bishop to h3, which soon will force black to resign. Once more, return please to diagram 2. Add the moves 5 d5 for black, 6 knight to g5 for white, and g6 for black, and again rook takes h7 for white. At this stage, I'm sure you will have wondered why I haven't mentioned the very obvious reply, bishop to f5 for black. We'll play this move and give it a diagram position, diagram 3. At first it looks as though the two white major pieces that form the mainstay of his attack are both en prise. Switch off for a moment, please, and make up your own minds what you would reply for white. My first thought was 8, queen to b5, check, black, bishop to d7, white, queen takes b7, black, bishop to c6, white, queen takes a8, black, bishop takes a8, and white, rook takes h8. And certainly, if white is allowed to play this, it would look pretty good. He's got 2 rooks for the queen, and since he also threatens knight to e6, which can't be stopped, and consolidates this with bishop to h3, follows this up with moves such as bishop to h6, it would seem that the stranglehold against the black position is complete. And this is mainly due to the fact that his white squares are so woefully weak and impossible to protect. From diagram 3, let's look once again at the move for white, queen to b5 check. I think black's best reply is c6. Then white, queen takes b7, and black, knight takes h7, white, queen takes a8, black, knight takes g5, white, bishop takes g5, and now probably for black, queen c7. And although black is a pawn down, the white queen is shut into the corner, and black may be able to create some counter chances. However, you will have noticed by now that from diagram 3, white has an even better move than queen to b5 with check. But just in case you're still puzzled, here is the solution. White plays 8, rook takes h8, looking as though he's sacrificing his queen. Black, bishop takes d3. White, rook takes f8, check. Black, king takes f8, and white 10, knight e6, check. Black, king e8. White 11, knight takes d8, and for the ending, as you see, white is a piece up and wins. From diagram 2, please, this time add the move d5 for black and 6, knight to g5 for white, and this time we'll play the move knight e4 for black. We see that black then is prepared to return the gambit pawn at once, but in doing so, at least temporarily, hopes to block the dangerous approach to his king and slow down the white attack. So if white plays knight takes e4, black d takes e4, 8, white queen takes e4, and black g6, I should think white still would perhaps have a slight advantage, but there wouldn't be anything very clear. Both sides, I imagine, would complete their development, and black has at least reasonable prospects of equalizing later in the middle game. So I think we need to look for something better for white. From diagram 2, again please add 5 d5 for black, and 6 knight g5 for white, 6 knight e4 for black. You may like to switch off here again for a moment and find a good continuation for white, and the move I recommend here is 7 knight takes h7. The immediate threat, of course, is knight f6 check, winning the exchange, and if black plays something very obvious to escape from this, such as rook g8, then white has f3 and follows this up with queen g6 check, leaving white with a devastating attack. So after the move 7 knight takes h7, black must play bishop f5, but now white has queen b5 with check, and this comes in very handy, for if 8 plays bishop d7, then simply queen takes d5, bishop c6, white knight f6 check, knight takes f6, 11 white, queen takes d8 check, black king takes d8, 12 white, rook takes h8, and white is the exchange and the pawn up. Maybe you'd like to look at this again. So, for one moment, back to diagram 2. For black, 5 d5. White, 6 knight g5. Black, knight e4. White, 7 knight takes h7. And black, bishop f5. White, 8 queen b5 check. And this time we'll play for black the move c6. But again, white plays queen takes b7, black rook takes h7, 10, white rook takes h7, black bishop takes h7, and white 11, queen takes a8. And once again, white is the exchange up. So we can rule out any lines where black allows white to gain this control of the H file with an extra tempo gain by recklessly grabbing the second pawn on h3. Let's then have a look what else there is for black. From diagram 1a, add the moves f takes g4 for black and h3 for white. We'll play the move knight f6 for black. White plays h takes g4 and black knight takes g4. One of the dangers of this kind of position is that white has almost got too much choice, and you may well wish to switch off here and test your own reactions. After looking at this for a while, I came to the conclusion that a quiet move for white now, such as 5e3, would be admirably suited to his purpose. So we'll play this move 5e3. The black knight is attacked and I think must withdraw to f6. And now simply 6 bishop d3. This offers white again a kind of from gambit in reverse with at least an extra tempo, so I should think he must have an excellent position here. In fact, if we look at it, we see that black 6d6 is forced, and now white plays 7 bishop g6 check at once. If black wants to avoid loss of the exchange, he's forced to play king to d7. And now I think e4 threatening e5 really leaves white with a very strong attack here. Another line which black can hardly afford to accept. And so this leaves us with just one more try for black. From diagram 1a, he plays f takes g4, white h3 and black d5. And perhaps this time white should not try and bulldoze his way through, since the black defenses are probably just about adequate to avoid immediate disaster. Even so, there are several good continuations for white, and we'll have a look at the move queen d3 again first, to which black replies knight f6. White plays h takes g4 and black bishop takes g4. And now, after 6 white bishop h3, this brings us to the position of diagram 4. And once again, I'd invite you to switch off and this time think of black's move, what would be most active for him. Well, if he exchanges on h3, this allows white to develop a piece freely, and an important piece too, that knight on h3, because from there it will immediately join in the attack. So black is not advised to do this really. If, on the other hand, he withdraws his bishop to h5, then again white has 7 queen b5 with check, and this time if black plays knight from b to d7, white 8, bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, and white queen takes b7, white will have regained his pawn with advantage. You notice in this variation that the bishop on h5 is rather a headache for black because he's got to defend it there. So from diagram 4, black's best move is queen d7, and if white now exchanges bishops, the black queen will get to the square g4 with some counter-attacking chances against the still undeveloped white pieces on the king side. So white can play the move f3. Now once again, this forces the black bishop to do something, and once again he won't want to exchange on h3. But it seems in this position that the move bishop e6, have you spotted this move? Bishop e6 is quite good. Note how black has stubbornly refused to exchange bishops and put the onus on white to do so. And if white now exchanges bishops, the black queen on e6 will be well placed to defend along its third rank. So after black has played bishop e6, white's best move is not bishop takes e6, but e4, threatening e5, with excellent compensation, since the black king's knight would once again be driven away from the square f6, and black's position looks rather ragged and disorganized. From diagram 1a, once more add the moves f takes g4 for black, h3 for white, and d4 for black. Apart from the move queen d3, other moves come into consideration. And if you examine the position, you will notice white has c4, or, perhaps even more enterprising, he could try the move e4. And if black doesn't take the pawn on e4, white simply pushes on to e5. After black has captured on e4, as I think he has to do, white plays h takes g4 with the open h-file and threats of g5. So once again black would have problems with developing his king's knight. So white should not be afraid of sacrificing a pawn or two temporarily, as he will always obtain more than enough positional compensation, and in any case his strong grip on the center will always cause black problems in developing his pieces, and in the long run ensure white the better game. So I should think even against black's resource d5, in the long run, white should really have good chances to develop an initiative. Certainly for black to allow white to open up the h-file for himself seems rather risky policy. So next we must examine what happens from diagram 1a and from diagram 1b if black does not allow the opening of the h-file but plays the move g3. So he returns the gambit pawn at once in an attempt to keep these two files closed, and at the same time, if white captures on g3, black hopes he will have a target there to exploit. So this time from diagram 1a, we'll play the moves black f takes g4, white h3, black g3, and white 4 f takes g3, black e6, and white 5 e4. And now if black tries to hit at the center with c5, simply 6 c3. It's well worth switching off here for a moment and have a look at this position, and in particular how important it is for white to have this move c3. In the next variation we shall see what could happen if it doesn't. So after c3, black c takes d4, white c takes d4 on move 7, and here, with this curious position, with all the pieces on both sides still pegged back on the back rank on their original squares, white stands better because his pawns on d4 and e4 completely control the center and can't be touched. Because of this factor, his weakness on g3 isn't really easy to get at, and white could, if necessary, always adequately cover this square with a move like queen to b3 or even queen f3. For the rest, white's development will progress very naturally, and he has a flexible setup depending on black's moves. And of course, if ever black tries bishop to d6, then e5 comes in very handy. So, because of the strength of the white center and white's obvious space advantage, he will always find it much easier to place his pieces on their best squares than black. So after the next 5 or 6 moves, white should get the better middle game. However, let's now compare this with what could happen from the position of diagram 1b. Add f takes g4 for black, h3 for white, and g3 for black. And once again, white f takes g3. And we see the important difference from the last variation. Pantaleev's critics pointed out quite correctly at the time that black now can effectively strike at the center with c5. And as we have seen, white can no longer prop up the center with c3, so he's really forced to advance his d-pawn. So once white is forced to advance his pawn to d5 onto a white square, this leaves his black squares very weak. And now the move bishop d6 by black, reinforced later by, say, queen c7, fully exploits that black square weakness and leaves the g-pawn very vulnerable and the white king behind it exposed. So if we examine the position with the white pawns on c4 and d4, and the black pawn advanced to g3, a better plan for white than f takes g3 would be the move f4. Although this leaves black temporarily with an extra pawn, that pawn on g3 isn't going to get very far, so white need not worry unduly. Black may try the move h5, intending to create a protected pass pawn with h4, but white will be able to cross that plan by playing h4 himself, and white's pawn on h4 can then be adequately protected. If, on the other hand, black meets f4 with queen h4, then white blocks the position with bishop g2. Thirdly, black may return the pawn with g2 at once. White then must recapture with bishop on g2, and black will continue queen h4 with check to stop white from castling, but again this is not so important. White will aim at e4 to establish a broad four-pawn center, and black will be reluctant to stop this with the move d5, since this would leave his own pawn structure rather weak. Against the move c5 by black, white might be able to ignore this, or he can safely push on to d5. And once white has played the move e4, the white king behind the broad four-pawn center for the moment will be quite safe on the square f1, especially after the black queen has been driven back with knight f3. And on the whole, I think I prefer white's game. Please return to the starting position, and I'd now like to take you through one of Panteleyev's own games in which black played that move g3. The game started 1 d4, black d5, 2 c4, black e6, and 3 knight to c3, f5. Now, this move order is probably not the most usual way for black to try and get into the stonewall variation of the Dutch defense. Nevertheless, it is a recognized method and has been tried from time to time. In order to cut across black's plans, white here decided to play the gambit with 4g4, and black accepted this with f takes g4. On move 5, white continued bishop f4. He would like to play the move h3 to invite the opening of the h-file, as we've seen before, but wants to make sure that if black replies g3, offering to return the gambit pawn, the square g3 is adequately protected. So after the move bishop f4, black replied knight f6. White 6 h3, and black did indeed reply g3. White captured with the f-pawn, f takes g3, black bishop d6, and white played 8 e3. And we see the importance for white to already have his bishop on f4 before black can play his to d6. Black now has nothing better than 8 bishop takes f4, white e takes f4, black castles, and white 10 knight f3. The position of diagram 5, and here white has a clear advantage. He has, as we see, a stranglehold on the center where black is saddled with a backward pawn. Also, he can complete his development at leisure, probably aiming at moves like queen c2 and castle queenside, and white has no worries over his square g3, since this can always be adequately covered by a move like rook g1. And once again, then we have an instructive example of how white, once he has adequately safeguarded himself against black's possible threats against the square g3, can obtain very good prospects in the middle game. Please return to the starting position and set up your pieces as in diagram 1a. Black can, of course, also decline white's gambit after g4 altogether, and he can do so in a number of different ways. The moves that come to mind immediately are 2 e6 or 2 d5, although, as we shall see, in both those cases white obtains promising play with the move g5, completely hampering black's development, particularly of his king's knight. Black can also play the move 2, knight to f6, though once again g5 will immediately come in by white, and the black knight will find itself rather chased around the board. In any case, if white can do so, he will naturally play the move g5, which will form a spearhead and at least temporarily prevent black's natural development. So, apart from the moves mentioned, there is also the move to d6. And for practical purposes, then we'll pick out first from diagram 1a to e6, and then discuss to d6, because I think those two moves are, from a practical point of view, probably the most important. So, diagram 1a, black 2e6, white 3g5, and now black plays the move h6. You may wonder why so early. I think black's first aim must be to neutralize, if not get rid of entirely, the advanced white g-pawn. And by attacking it straight away, he doesn't allow white the time to protect his king rook with a move like b bishop to g2. For if the bishop now was on g2, white could continue with h4, and now if black exchanges pawns on g5, the rooks too will come off along the h-file. I think the open h-file in such a position would probably be more to white's advantage, as his pieces are more likely to infiltrate there. Anyway, this is all theoretical, and we assume that black has played the move h6, preventing all this, and so white replies to this move 4, f4, and if now black continues with bishop e7, further attacking the square g5, white can play the move h4, black 5, h takes on g5, white 6, f takes on g5, and now I think black hasn't really any more set plan. It will certainly take him a long while to develop his queenside pieces and then to castle queenside, whereas all the white developing moves follow quite logically. White plays moves like knight to f3, develops his king's bishop on g2, and this always comes in handy, exerting pressure along the long diagonal. Plays his other bishop to f4, once again exploiting a good diagonal. Plays his pawn to c4 and knight behind it to c3. His queen either to c2 or d2, as the case demands, and then completes his development with castling queenside. Again, white need not be in any hurry committing his e-pawn. This may later develop either at e3 or e4, again as the situation demands. So, I don't think black should really allow this move g5 without doing something about it quite early on. And I'd like to now mention the move 2d6 from diagram 1a. So with this move, black defends his f-pawn with a piece, having decided not to accept the gambit. And also, if white plays g5 as in the last variation, hopes to stake a claim on the center with an immediate push to e5. Let's have a look at this position. It looks more promising than the last one. But even so, after 2, black d6, 3, white g takes f5, black bishop takes f5, and 4, bishop g2, black now plays c6. And from this position, I think there's probably more than one way in which white can obtain at least a slight advantage. And the method I would recommend here is for white to immediately occupy the center with 5 e4, black presumably bishop g6, and now to prevent black's plan of an e5, he would play the move d5. After black's reply, knight to f6, white 7, knight to c3, white has steered the game into a kind of Benoni, but with certain additional advantages to himself. With the black e-pawn pegged back on e7 and his bishop on g6, preventing the normal fianchetto of the king's bishop, white should have good prospects of increasing his pressure in the middle game. This then is the end of side 1. Please now turn over to the reverse side of the tape. Please revert to the key position I mentioned on the first side of the tape. After black's 12th move, and add 13 queen knight to queen 2. This is the alternative which I mentioned at the beginning of this variation. Unfortunately, there seems to be no practical experience with this line. Aggressive play against the Dutch, side 2. On the early parts of this cassette, I refer to the Bulgarian master Pantareyev, to whom the move g4 originally was accredited against the Dutch defense. This idea was quite popular at the time, but somehow never spread and eventually seems to have died a natural death. Pantareyev is virtually unknown in this country today, but belongs to the category of player who made a name for himself in chess theory for his originality of ideas in the opening. Unfortunately, as so often happens, some critic got hold of the idea made some superficial suggestion of a supposed refutation, probably no more than a couple of moves, and his verdict was then backed perhaps in grandmaster circles and came to be known as the final authority and accepted by all and sundry without further questioning or criticism. It's unfortunate that we come across this kind of thing all too often in chess, and more often than not, a perfectly worthy idea is unjustifiably and prematurely doomed for the scrap heap. And until and unless someone comes along to the rescue by resurrecting it from its obscurity, I can't help thinking that many valuable constructive contributions must have been buried somewhere throughout the decades and lost to the chess world. However, let's now revert back to our theme, and from diagram 1b we'll first have a look at a game Pantaleev against Prahov, one of the earliest games with this variation, which was played in Sofia, Bulgaria in 1951, where black accepted the gambit pawn and allowed white the open h-file. This time the difference is, of course, that the moves c4 for white and e6 for black have been interpolated. And this means that white has made a move to consolidate his center. Black, on the other hand, played a developing move, and later in the game this will often give him the chance to play a free check, that's bishop on b4 with check. So, from diagram 1b, black plays the move f takes g4, and this time white replies 4 e4. Now, we discussed the pros and cons of the move h3 on the other side of the cassette. This would be possible here, I suppose, too. In reply to e4, black plays d6. This move was criticized at the time for being too passive, but some of its alternatives that were suggested hardly seem to be any better. If, for instance, 4, queen h4, 5, white, bishop f4, and if now g3 by black, white simply plays f takes g3 and has a good game. If 4 e5, white can play d takes e5, knight c6, and now white plays bishop f4. And for fuller details of this particular line, you may wish to refer to my comments on the game in the accompanying booklet. Another move black has tried in this position is 4 c5, but again, as you will see, white replied 5 d5, and after e5 for black, white had much the better chances. So let's stick to the move 4 d6 for black, and white here played h3 as before. Black decided to capture this pawn. G takes h3. No doubt he looked at his own game very carefully there and thought that his defensive chances would be adequate. He could have played g3. That was possible, as we saw on the other side of the cassette, and then 6f4 might have come into consideration for white, as I discussed. But after g takes h3, white knight takes h3, and now black followed the simple plan of playing his bishop to e7. Nothing very spectacular about that, but he intended to prevent white from advancing his knight to g5. On move 7, white played his knight to f4, f4 instead, black knight f6, 8 knight g6, and rook to g8. And we now see the other line of attack for the white knight, since the straightforward inroad via g5 was prevented. He tries to create an inlet via f4 to g6, and that too is worth bearing in mind, as it could become relevant in quite a number of analogous lines. So, after black has played his rook to g8, which is his only move here, knight takes e7 for white, queen takes e7 for black, and now the move e5 for white, d takes e5, and on move 11, white d takes e5. And the knight withdraws knight from f to d7 for black. At a glance it would seem possible that the advanced white pawn on e5 could present black with a target. But by now we see that white has created some good tactical chances, and he plays the move 12, queen to h5 check, black g6, and now white queen takes h7. So once again he has fully exploited the weak square complex around the black king that we talked of on the other side of the cassette. Rook to g7 by black, and 14 queen h8 check for white, queen f8 for black. Now here white decided to swap queens. Queen takes f8 check. This appears to simplify the issue somewhat, but white must have calculated it very carefully in advance. For if black didn't have to recapture with the knight, his position wouldn't look too bad, with pressure from his two knights against the white pawn on e5. Unfortunately for black, he has no choice, since retaking with the king would lose the exchange. So after black knight takes f8, white plays knight c3 and black knight c6, white bishop f4, and now black replies a6. Please switch off and find white's next move. The move he plays is knight e4, and this proves the key to a winning attack, with the white pawn on e5 and all the minor pieces now playing a dominant role in undermining the black king position and launching a decisive attack. Please return once more to diagram 1b. Black can, of course, decline white's gambit in a couple of different ways, and the first one we'll look at is the move 3 d5. This then is slightly different from the move order 1 d4 d5, 2 c4 e6, 3 knight c3 f5, and 4 g4 with black to move, which you will recall we mentioned on side 1 of the cassette. With the move order 1 d4 e6, 2 c4 f5, and 3 g4 d5, white has been able to play his flank attack one move earlier without having committed his queen's knight. Obviously, if white now plays the move knight c3, this would transpose, but in the position he has more choice. And here we will look at the move 4g takes f5, black e takes f5, and 5c takes d5. And we'll give this diagram 6. And I'd like you to switch off here for a moment and study the position. What have you observed? Firstly, white has regained the gambit pawn, and at the moment he's even a pawn up, which black will retake with the queen. Secondly, white has opened up the g-file, and although at the moment both sides are undeveloped, later this open g-file may become quite significant. So, from diagram 6, let's look at the obvious reply by black 5, queen takes d5, white 6, knight to f3, black knight to f6, and now 7, white knight to c3. Now, it isn't altogether easy for black to decide what to do with his queen. If he tries to maintain it in its central position by pinning the knight, then white could continue with a move like 8 rook g1, black g6, and now 9 queen a4 with check. Black must play knight c6, and now 10 a3 forces the exchange of minor pieces. Black then captures on c3, 11 white b takes c3. And now white has the bishop pair with the extra bonus of an open b file for his queen's rook. His immediate threat is c4 followed by d5, and if black tries to evade this by exchanging queens, by checking on a5, this open position would be very much in white's favor. In fact, it would be ideal for the two rooks operating along the b file and g file, and the bishops taking advantage of their useful diagonals. Now, one feature of this position is that the white king is stranded in the center of the board. But this hardly seems to matter here. We've seen that both the white rooks can become very active along the two semi-open files, the G file and the B file, and this means that black too may find it difficult to decide on which side he will castle, for fear of running into one of these attacks along the files controlled by a white rook. So quite possibly black will prefer to keep his king in the center as well. However, if you are one of these players with white who at all costs want your king in absolute safety and prefer your king position tucked away in the corner, then you can choose as an alternative bishop to g2, and instead of the move rook to g1, castles kingside. As I say, I don't think this is absolutely necessary, but if it gives you a feeling of security, it isn't a bad idea. From diagram 6, once again, please add the moves queen takes d5 for black, 6 knight f3 for white, and knight f6 for black, and 7 knight c3 for white. The alternative for black, of course, is to withdraw his queen, and we'll have a look at what could happen if he plays queen to d8. When I looked at this position, it struck me straight away that white could obtain active play by a move like queen to b3. And after this move, his position is very flexible. For instance, he could play his rook along the open file once again, rook to g1. He could develop his bishop on f4 or g5 as the situation demands. He could play his knight to e5. He'll probably castle on the queen's side. He'll also finish after his king's bishop g2, and black must always reckon with the threat of d5. This pawn advance can be quite annoying. There's the open g file, and possibly also the subsidiary possibility of e3 followed by bishop c4. In any case, black is prevented from castling for quite a long time, and this too will cause him some problems. There was another game played in Sofia back in 1951 between Pantaleyev and Atanasov, where white, in principle, followed this recipe, and from diagram 6, after black had played queen takes d5, white 6 knight f3, black knight f6, 7 knight c3, black queen d8, and white rook g1. Black tried to move knight from b to d7, and after 9 queen to b3, decided that he wanted to allow his queen's bishop scope to develop without losing the b pawn, and played the move knight b6. But now white simply followed this up with bishop g5, and from there had an excellent game which he managed to win. I'd like you now, please, to return once more to diagram 1b. Now you will recall that the move d5 by black is not the only way in which he can decline the gambit, and that another method to achieve a similar aim would be by playing the move knight to f6. As I pointed out, he would then have to reckon with the possible reply by white g5. Still, I'd like us now to have a look at the game between two Hungarians, played in Budapest 1956, white Dr. Tilly and black Tippery, in which black tried to use this method of play. So, from diagram 1b, add the move knight to f6 for black. We'll look at the reply for g5 later. In the game under discussion, white decided to play the move 4, g takes f5, black e takes f5, and 5 knight to c3, and now black replied d5. Once again, there's another possibility here, 5 bishop to b4, and we'll discuss this one later as well. Meanwhile, 5, knight to c3 and d5. 6, c takes d5, knight takes d5, and 7, bishop g2. Black withdrew his knight to f6, and white played 8, bishop f4. Black now played bishop d6. We've seen this type of setup where black offers the exchange of dark squared bishops before, and this time white played 9, knight to h3. This is a good move, and it's played with the dual purpose of keeping the long diagonal open for his king's bishop, and also protecting the queen's bishop, so that if black exchanges, white's king's knight comes into play via the square f4. Again, we've seen this before. Now, black here played the move c6, and I'd like you to switch off here for a moment and have a look at this position. Certainly, the threat of d5 at some stage had to be taken into account. With the move c6, black hoped to prevent that advance and also develop his queen's bishop later. Switch off a moment and guess white's next move. White did in fact play the move d5 after all. Now this is given an exclamation mark, and we shall see in subsequent play that it turns out very well for him. Black exchanged bishops, bishop takes f4, white, knight takes f4, black, c takes d5, and on move 12, white, knight from c takes d5, and black castles. 13, queen b3, and black king h8, moving away from the diagonal where discovered check was threatened. And now white 14, rook d1, and here diagram 7, and we can see that white has already got a big advantage strategically, in fact, for one position. I've included this game in the booklet, and you will wish to play through the remaining moves for yourselves. White won this game in 37 moves. Once again, please turn back to diagram 1b and add the moves 3, knight f6 for black, 4, g takes f5, black e takes f5, and 5, knight to c3. And this time, instead of replying 5 d5, black chooses another move and plays bishop b4, pinning the white queen's knight. We'll follow again Pantaleyev against Lesanov, Sofia 1953, and this is one of the few games where Pantaleyev came a cropper, didn't quite play the best method, and the mistakes are quite instructive, and I think we can learn a lot from them. White here continued queen b3. This in itself isn't really a mistake, but white now has to count on the black king's knight coming in on e4, which there really was no need to allow. And to prevent this, I would have probably preferred the counterpin with bishop g5. Well, after 6 queen b3, black immediately captured on c3. Switch off for a moment and decide which way you would retake. White retook with the queen, and I wonder what you would have done. I have no doubt that White's intention was to keep his queenside pawns straight and undoubled, but the white queen will soon have to move again with tempo loss, and so in spite of everything, I think I would have preferred the move b takes c3, since this would avoid White's loss of time and possibly offer him some active counterplay with the bishop pair later. As the game went, the white queen's bishop never came into play at all as an active force. So, after 7 queen takes c3, black knight e4, and now the white queen is forced to move again, so more tempo loss with 8 queen c2, black knight c6, developing a piece, threatening a pawn in the process, so white must play knight f3, and now black queen f6 is already beginning to assume quite a dominant position, and white should from here take great care to keep the balance. I think black has the better chances. However, 10 e3, black castles, and now white played the move 11 bishop d2, and this I think is wrong. I don't think he can afford to play non-committal moves of this kind, and probably his best chance here would have been to play something like rook to g1. After 11 bishop to d2, black plays d6, and now white bishop to c3, a maneuver surely which is much too slow and ponderous and was doomed to failure right from the start. Black bishop d7, white castles queenside. In my notes to the game, I suggested that perhaps d5, either now or on the next move, was the only remaining chance for white to hold the game together. In reply to castles queenside, black played 13a5 and white 14 king b1, which, as we see, does not guarantee white's king any safety. Black continues knight b4, another strong move, forcing the white queen to move yet again, and after 15 queen e2 by white, f4, and this position is already very difficult for white. Here, in fact, white blundered with the move 16 bishop g2, and I'm sure you will see for yourselves that after 16 queen g6, white had no answer to the double threat of queen takes g2 and the discovered check, so he really had no option but to resign. I'd like to emphasize that this one setback in no way should deter us from our theme. If anything, it's an instructive example of how white must not allow himself to be bogged down by passive play. Once again, please put back your pieces to the position of diagram 1b, add the move 3 knight to f6 for black. The variation that we've just seen, 4 g takes f5, black e takes f5, 5 knight to c3, bishop to b4, probably leaves white with only a slight advantage, as with correct play, that is white's counterpin with bishop to g5, it could lead to a simplified kind of middle game with the exchange of a couple of minor pieces. So after the move 3 knight to f6 for black from diagram 1b, we should examine the white continuation 4 g5, which I think maintains the tension and is more exciting. We already saw in the early parts of the tape how it offered white some very genuine chances of a permanent advantage. So after 3 knight f6 for black, let's play 4 g5, and now for black 4 knight to e4, and white 5 h4. As we saw before, this move is well suited to bolster the square g5, and we'll give this diagram 8, and from diagram 8 we'll look at two variations now for black. First, to move 5 bishop b4 check, and secondly 5 h6. So diagram 8, black to move bishop b4 check, 6 white knight d2, and black bishop takes d2 with check. Of course, if instead of this black had played a move d6 here, that would have been a blunder, when white would reply 7 queen a4 with check, forcing knight c6, and 8 d5, winning a piece. So after 6 bishop takes d2 check, 7 white bishop takes d2, and black knight c6, white 8 e3, and black castles. This indeed looks risky. As we said before, one of the trump cards in white's hands of the entire variation is to make castling for black extremely difficult, and the line certainly proves the point. Perhaps here, instead of 8 castles, black should consider 8 d6. That might be slightly better, although I still think white maintains a plus with play on both wings. So after the move 8 castles kingside, white 9 bishop g2, black knight takes d2, and 10 white queen takes d2. And already I think white stands much better. If, for instance, black tries to free his game with 10 d6, white 11 castles queenside, e5, 12 d takes e5, black d takes e5, 13 bishop d5 check, king h8. White can force a very favorable ending with 14 bishop takes c6, queen takes d2, 15 rook takes d2, b takes c6, and 16 knight f3, e4, 17 knight e5. So we'll now look at the other line from diagram 8 and play 5h6 for black. When this variation was first introduced, it was suggested that white here should play the move 6, g takes h6, and indeed at a glance this looks a very tempting move. For instance, black could reply bishop b4 check, white 7 knight c3. This is rather an unexpected surprise turn of events. Black takes on c3, knight takes c3, and white 8 queen b3. Again, worth a diagram, diagram 9. And from diagram 9, black could say continue knight takes a2 with check, 9 king d1, and now black g7 takes h6, white recaptures his piece, rook takes a2, black c5, and 11 white, knight f3, black knight c6, and 12 the move d5. And although white is a pawn down, he has strong threats. Indeed, with moves like rook g1 and knight e5, his whole army threatens to invade, and the black fortress looks about as insecure as a card house in a howling gale. So this would be all right for white. Let's have a look at another variation, again from diagram 9. Black knight takes a2 check, 9 king d1, and this time knight takes c1, 10 h takes g7 for white, and now knight takes b3. An extraordinary sort of position. 11 g takes h8 equals queen with check, black bishop f8, and 12 queen h5 check, king e7. Now here materially black is ahead. He has 2 pieces for a rook and probably could win another pawn. White has got the perpetual check in hand. He could continue 13, queen g5 check, king e8, and 14 queen g6 check, etc. But I'm sure that here, with a very promising position, he will want to be more ambitious and work out a winning attack. And this should be quite possible. So once again, the variation looks good for white. And once again, please turn back to diagram 9, and we'll now try and see whether black can't improve on this. In a position where a discovered check is threatened, I think we need to look at all the possibilities, not just the obvious ones or the ones that regain material. And so I suggest for black the move 9, knight e4 with discovered check. This leaves the bishop on prise, and on move 10 white must take the bishop. Queen takes on b4, black g takes h6, white to move. Now this all appears fairly straightforward. The material is now balanced, and although white has the 2 bishops, there are certain factors in the position that offer black good compensation. The black knight on e4 is fairly useful there, and incidentally can't easily get shifted by a move like f3, since black could then always reply knight to g3, forking the rook and the bishop. Now, if all the white pieces were occupying natural squares, this position would probably still be better for him. But if we look at it, we see that the white queen on b4 is rather awkwardly placed there, at least for the time being. And black is threatening knight to c6. If he is allowed to do that, this would not only attack the queen, but also leave the d-pawn, somewhat surprisingly, without a defense, on account of the other knight on e4. So in order to prevent this maneuver, white probably has to play the move d5. But now black gains some time with knight to a6. White must withdraw the queen to b3, and white knight a6 to c5, forcing the white queen to move yet again. And we see here that the position is rather unclear. After white has withdrawn the queen to c2, for instance, black could play a move like a5, and then both sides will complete their development, and I should think the chances could be about equal in the middle game. Please return to diagram 8 and once again add the move for black 5 h6. Here, an interesting idea for white would be to play 6 bishop g2. Now, the first thing we notice that the move bishop b4 check for black now isn't really that effective, because white then simply moves his king to f1 out of harm's way, and the black bishop on b4 is probably misplaced there and liable to get driven back. So after the move 6 bishop g2, we'll play h takes g5 for black, and now white bishop takes e4, black f takes e4, and now white 8 bishop takes g5. Black must play bishop e7, and now white knight h3 on move 9. And here we'll give this diagram 10, and I think white has a very good position. Mainly because the black pawn on e4 turns out to be rather weak. Note that the fact that white has no longer got his light-squared bishop doesn't seem to matter a great deal here, since his control over the black squares has given him a very strong bind on the position. Also, black's own light-squared bishop presents something of a problem. So from diagram 10, we can first of all rule out the offbeat reply by black e3. And if you look at my analytical notes in the booklet, you will see the refutation of that one. Also from diagram 10, if on move 9 black plays d6, then white can intervene with knight to c3. This attacks the black pawn on e4, and if black still persists with his plan of playing e5, the knight simply captures on e4, adding an additional guard to the square g5. So obviously this doesn't work for black either. And we now have to ask ourselves the question, what does? From diagram 10, we'll give black another try. He plays the move b6, hoping to fianchetto his queen's bishop. White plays 10 e3 and black bishop b7. And now all the good moves are white's. He could, for instance, here try 11 knight to c3 with the view of queen to g4 on the following move. This would look very strong, but stronger still perhaps is the move 11 queen to g4 at once. Since now the black d-pawn can't move, is tied down to the defense of the square e6, black finds it extremely difficult to develop his queenside position at all. Note that if black exchanges bishops here, this will not achieve anything either, since then the white knight gets to g5, and there it is extremely well placed, adding more pressure on the two black central pawns on e6 and on e4. So the move 11 bishop b4 check would be a desperation move for black, but white simply avoids this with 12 king to f1, and now unless black retreats his bishop straight away, he's really forced to play a move like queen to c8, and this looks terrible. White continues 13a3, driving back the bishop. Incidentally, the bishop can't even retreat to e7 now, because white would then exchange bishops, and black has to retake with the king, and the white queen captures the g-pawn with check. So, when black retreats, he must retreat bishop d6, and now 14 knight d2, and this could safely be judged a one game for white. So, this is an appropriate point of signing off, and if I've presented to you a system where white poses all the problems for black to answer, instead of the other way around, I feel I've achieved what I set out to accomplish.